Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to be talking about alignment, agreement, and personal hierarchy in Kawahiva, a Tupi-Guarani language. Before diving into the topic of this talk, I would like to start by thanking the following Kawahiva communities without whom this presentation would have never been possible. They are the Karipuna, Juma, and Ruiwawal communities, especially my consultants from these communities, Adriano Karipuna, Mandei Juma, and Borapo and Mandei Ruiwawal. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the following institutions that have, in various states of the project, on which I'm going to present some results today. Um, Provide funding for my work. These are the Museu do Índio, Museu Paraense Emílio Guild, and the University of California in Berkeley. And also, last but not least, I'd like to thank the organizing committee of the Amazonicas 8, and especially the General Sectional Committee. Some introduction to this talk. Tupi-Guarani language distinguish grammatical relations via agreement prefixes in the main clause. And generally speaking, if you look at it through the literature agreement on this language, you will generally see that only the verb has only one agreement slot, which means that in clauses with a monotransitive verb, the only one argument will be controlling the agreement on the verb at a time. So only one will be marked at a time on the verb. There are exceptions for some languages, of course, and specifically in these exceptions refer to scenarios where the first person is, the subject is a first person and the object is a second person, because in those cases, some languages have a portmanteau morpheme that allow both subject and object to control agreement on the verb. But other than these scenarios of 1/2, the choice of which argument will be marked on the verb depends on person hierarchy. In some languages, this person hierarchy is the 1/2/3 hierarchy. For other languages, there might be a 1/2/3 hierarchy. And there are cases where you actually find a mixture of both, as in Kamayura, and as I will be discussing later in Kawahiva as well. So some examples from Kamayura, just to give you a taste of what we're going to see later. If you take 1, A, and B here, you see that regardless of the syntactic position of the first person, that's the one that will be marked on the verb if the other argument is a third person. Let me scroll down. It has also been argued that for the Tupi-Guarani language, the 1/2/3 hierarchy is very common, while only 2 languages have the 1/2/3 hierarchy. So having that backdrop in the back of our mind, in this talk, I will present novel data on the agreement pattern of Kawahiva to show that some varieties have a mixture of the one of this hierarchy and the 1/3 one, while other dialects of the same language have only this type of hierarchy, the 1/3. And a note here about the data that I'll be using in this talk. All data that you see with no reference to the source have been collected, were collected through fieldwork that I carried out in the indigenous lands of the Shona, Karipuna, and Ruiwawal communities and over Zoom since the pandemic as well. And this work has been ongoing since 2017. Some background: Kawahiva, and this is a Tupi-Guarani language spoken by around 560 people in Western Brazil, precisely in the states of Amazonas, Mato Grosso, and Rondônia. There are 9 varieties of the language, though this classification is not a linguistic-based classification. It actually comes from the principle adopted by previous researchers on the language, where one group, one community corresponds to one dialect. Nouns in this language are not marked for morphological cases. To my knowledge, all other Tupi-Guarani language verbs can inflect for person and number. Let me scroll down here. They also can host voice morphology, such as a causative prefix "ma," and take a variety of aspectal suffixes. So in 2 here, we see the outermost, the leftmost prefix is the one for person and number information, while the innermost one is this voice morpheme prefix that causativizes this verb shut off. And that can be a bunch of aspectal suffixes to the right of the verb root, such as this one, which means completely. We will be seeing matrix clause, where the information conveyed by that clause is new information. And so you will be seeing a bunch of VSO clauses given this informational status of that they bear. And 3 is an example of the matrix clauses that are new information, that are other and new information in this language. So you have the verb in clause initial position, then the subject and the object. Notice here that the nouns in this language are marked for gender, and for gender if they are living human nouns whose reference are living human reference. So now let's talk about agreement and person hierarchy per se. So agreement in TD, some background on this topic. Either the subject or object are marked on the verb, as I said before. Which argument gets marked onto the verb depends on how they rank in a personal hierarchy, which differs from language to language. And for some languages, as I said, that can be also an option where both the subject and object control the agreement at the same time. And these contexts are those where where the subject is a first person and the object is a second person. So in those cases, in many languages, we will have a portmanteau morpheme, where 2 portmanteau morphemes. Actually, the difference between them is that the one is for cases where the object, second person object is singular, and the other one was where the object is a second person plural. And more recently, as I mentioned before, there has been a typological survey by Rose 2015, which surveyed to any Tupi-Guarani language and found the following. So most of them have a person hierarchical agreement system of this type, the 1/2/3 type, or they are better characterized as having this hierarchy. Here is the results in a table of the survey, and you'll see that the last row here, the bottom of this table, has the row with the name of the language where we find this hierarchy. And notice that only 2 languages have the personal hierarchy, where the first person outranks the second, and in turn outranks the third person. And as you can also glance from this table, no Kawahiva dialect has been was included in the survey, but most likely due to lack of data. And next, I showed that I built on this work by Rose. I showed that some dialects pattern just like most DD language, as having this type of hierarchy, and actually mixture between this type and the first one here, the 1/2/3. But the others are just like Kavakanoid and Kayabi in having only this type of hierarchy, 1/3. Let me see how much time I still have. Yeah. So the dialects that have the 1/2/3 type, which is the least common in the Tupi-Guarani language, are the Juma and Ruiwa dialects. In my own work, I have found that grammatical relations in this language, as many other Tupi-Guarani languages, are conveyed through agreement prefixes on the verb. There is, though, a difference in the status of these prefixes. In the case of subject agreement, what we have is actually inflectional, true inflectional prefixation, and in the case of object agreement, what we find is a pronoun that incorporates into the verb. But that will be the object of another talk in the future. So table 1 here shows that the agreement markers for Juma and Ruiwa, they are exactly the same. These are the subject markers in this row that I'm hovering over with my mouse here, and the object markers are these ones. I illustrate that these dialects do have the 1/3 hierarchy with data from Juma. Just for the sake of time, I will not go over the Ruiwa facts, but the only difference that you will see if you look at the Ruiwa facts once compared with the data that I will present based on Juma is that given that we will use the verb to see, which in Juma is realized as hepia. In Uruewa, there is no age here, and what we have is hepia. So in contexts where the first person is whenever you have a first person in subject position, regardless of the number of the second person, the first person controls agreement on the verb. So that supports the 1/2 part here of the hierarchy, and the other piece that I have to show in order to posit the hierarchy as such is that whenever you have the first person as an object position, and regardless of the number of the subject, second person, then the first person also once again controls agreement on the verb. In scenarios where we have the first person and second person in subject position and the third person object position, then you'll get the agreement with the first and the second person respectively, as on 8 showing here, with the first person singular as the subject of this sentence. Same thing applies for the second person, as in 9. Whenever the same first and second person occupy the object position, then you get agreement with them. They are the controllers of agreement in case the subject is a third person. So whenever you have, as the hierarchy suggests, whenever you have first or second person, the third person will always be ranked, and the first and second will control agreement on the verb. I have now to show that, I showed this, and given that the hierarchy suggests that there is no ranking between the third persons, you'll get subject agreement whenever you have 3/3 then the default pattern is subject to agreement. This table is a helpful table because it shows all the logical combinations of arguments in transitive sentences and the resulting agreement morphology on the verb. So if you have a subject, which is a first person singular, and an object that is a second person singular, then you get the first person singular marker. That's how you should read off this table. Next, I showed that two other dialects of this language have a different pattern of person hierarchies, and these dialects have actually mixture of two different types. So Karipuna, on which I have also conducted field work, has the 1/2/3 plus 1/2/3 hierarchy. And we see that in contexts where the first person is the subject and the second person the object, you'll get the famous portmanteau morphemes marked on the verb, which means that both subject and object come to agreement on the verb. The difference is between the oro and opo again is that one is used if the object is the has singular number, and the in the other case if the object has a plural number. But if you have two over one scenarios where the first person is the object instead, then you get object agreement with that first person, no matter, as 16 shows, regardless of the number of the second person subject. In cases where the first and second person are acted upon by a third person, as in 3/1 and 3/2, and as 17 and 18 shows, you get agreement with the object, given that the hierarchy states that the third person is always ranked by either the first and the second person. Again, 3/3 scenarios are by default scenarios where the subject is the controller of agreement on the verb. Another table here that might be helpful to you is this one for Karipuna, where compared to the other table where I also summarized the logical combinations for Joma and Uruewawal. The difference between the two is that here, whenever you have a first person singular, or a first person as the subject and your object is the second person, you get either one of these two portmanteau morphemes. And these are the Karipuna agreement markers. The difference between this table and the other one I showed before in the Joma and Uruewawal section is that here you have the portmanteau morphemes. And last but not least, I'd like to finish by mention that in Parinthinchira, it seems that we have also the same type of person hierarchy mixture that we see in Karipuna, though there is no data that supports that for sure. But given that the author piece, who had worked on Parinthinchira for a long time as a missionary of the SRL, she notes that there are the portmanteau morphemes oro and opo, and the conditions where they occur are the same as I just described for Karipuna, which means that it is highly likely the case that this dialect also has the same person hierarchies that I'm proposing for Karipuna, that is 1/2/3 and 1/2/3. And it is possible the case, although there is no data to prove that whenever you have 2/1 and 2/1 scenarios, this scenario will yield agreement to the first person object, which means that the second person doesn't outrank the first person. In this case, it is actually outranked by the first person. And that's why I say that these dialects are dialects that have a mixture between these two types of agreement, person hierarchies. Let me scroll down a little bit to conclude by saying that most of the languages, Tupi-Guarani languages, have been shown to have this type of hierarchy, 1/2/3, and very few exhibited the 1/2/3 hierarchy. But here I showed that in the same language we can actually see more than one type of hierarchy at play. So in Caripuna, there are the mixture between the 1/2/3 plus the 1/2/3 hierarchy. But as in Jumento, we will always see that we have the 1/2/3 hierarchy. That's it. There are some references here for you, and thank you.